All right. I would say we are complete, at least from the presenter side. And we're now, I would suggest to start the meeting and the webinar. Thanks everyone again for joining us. I hope you can see the slides as well. I'm not quite sure if that works out. So hi again from my side. My name is Leah. I'm from Open and Agile Smart Cities. And welcome to this joint webinar today that we are organizing with the SCORE project. And I will now hand over the mic to Claus Mullie from the SCORE project, and he will give you a short introduction to this webinar. And I will then walk you through the agenda, and yeah, then we're going to start, I would suggest. All right, Claus, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much, Leah. So definitely thank you, Martin and OASC for organizing today's webinar. So it's really nice to see how SCORE and OASC are collaborating. So I think maybe I could start off today's session really looking at the problem we're trying to solve. So I think today's session will kind of look at what SCORE is doing and what OASC is doing with Synchronicity to understand how we can develop open solutions also based on a common minimum ground. And I think what we're really talking about is how are we fundamentally wiring up our cities over the next 20, 30 years? And so I think we're at a kind of a tipping point where we really are putting in a new digital or ICT infrastructure layer for public infrastructure. And I think here it's really nice to think about ICT being a bit like sewage. It's an infrastructure layer which we don't think about until it breaks, and it causes all kinds of headaches. Secondly, sticking onto that sewage layer, ICT, or kind of the digital infrastructure layer, is also quite prone to legacy systems. So if you think about how we have, maybe a Roman sewage system covered over with a middle-aged street network covered over with a modern city. So now that when we need to replace pipes and cables, we need to use all kinds of complex ground penetrating radar to figure out what's under the ground. So I think the same thing will start happening with digital. So rather than having cables on the ground, it's all kinds of snippets of code and data sources which are connected. And so I think thinking about this ICT layer as being a critical infrastructure that is prone to having the problems of legacy systems, it's really important to understand how can we really get this nervous system right, because of course the ICT layer in cities will kind of be a meta infrastructure. So it'll support all kinds of economic activity. Think about transport, energy. It supports government decision making. It supports data which citizens and businesses need on a daily basis. Secondly, it's also growing at an exponential rate. So rather than putting in a new layer of the city layering up every 200 years, we're innovating at an exponential pace. And so we're constantly developing new apps, platforms, data portals, data sources, sensors, which are all kind of getting stacked on top of each other at extremely fast pace, but also with a very kind of complex set of partners working together. So you have transport authorities, you have municipal governments, regional governments, and everyone's trying to figure out how can we actually build an infrastructure layer that works for everyone without creating a huge nightmare mess that we don't really know what is connected to what and how things are actually interacting. So today's webinar is to look at how can we set up or start preparing cities and also, of course, the market to be able to build open, shareable, and replicable solutions that can help us cut through this complexity, avoid exponential crises of chaos, and also kind of have a sustainable market that can also build solutions in a nice way that also works for providers.
All right, thanks a lot, Claus, for this introduction. I will walk you now shortly through the agenda. So I hope everybody can see my screen. We will start off with Claus again. So he will present the ambition of SCORE. And then we move on to Boris from Hoytema. He will present from a developer's perspective what is SCORE and what they're doing and trying to do. And then we move on to Ben Cerveny. He is with the Foundation for Public Code, and he will give us a short explanation of how the Foundation for Public Code is linked to SCORE. The second part will then be a short overview from the OASC and Synchronicity perspective. So we have with us Martin Brynskov, he's the chair of OASC and also the coordinator of Synchronicity, giving a brief overview of the Synchronicity and OASC ambitions. Then we have with us as well Thomas Gilbert from the Alexandra Institute, and he will share from a developer's perspective as well the Synchronicity ambition and how does it actually contribute to making the OASC principles real. And then from my side, I will shortly present the role of the cities within OASC in approving and accepting the standards. And then we have time for questions and answers. If there's any questions right now or any comments, happy to hear them. If not, I would give again the floor to Claus. So if there are no questions from the participants or from anybody else, no. Then Claus, I would hand over the floor to you again.
Sure. Thank you very much, Leah. So yes, now, SCORE Amsterdam, in which 9 different cities and 4 support organizations, including some universities and a living lab or kind of a science park, to look at how we can collaboratively solve urban problems. You know, how are cities approaching these problems? How are they using data to solve these problems, and how can they work together to share as much experience as they can to understand how they're going about these issues, and then of course also to understand how can we, if one city invests in building a particular solution, how can the solution also be to the benefit of all the other cities? And so SCORE is a project which started very recently, so it's just under a year, and we're now looking at defining you know, which common problems would we like to work on, and how can we start formulating common solutions to these. But I think I will invite Boris, who is the open source lead on SCORE, to kind of really flesh out kind of how we're doing that. Boris?
Yes, hello. Hello. I hope that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. So in SCORE, basically, I'd like to explain a bit about like what open source is. My role in SCORE is to be the open source development manager on behalf of the partnership and the city of Amsterdam. And also for the city of Amsterdam, I work as their open source advisor to sort of shape their processes. And for this, I think it's important to talk about the basics as well. First, I want to talk a bit about what open source means for technology development and what open collaboration can bring city technology, so for governments, academia, and for businesses. And the tools that we have in the partnership to sort of help this. And at the end, I want to end with how we could work together maybe or collaborate. So basically, I would like to start with what is open source? Sorry, I think I'm showing the wrong window here. Here we go. What is open source? If you look at the Wikipedia page for the open source model, if you Wikipedia open source, you see the open source model is a decentralized software development model that encourages open collaboration. And so it's a model for software development, and it's decentralized. But I think the most important aspect of this is that it is an open collaboration. And an open collaboration is sort of a fundamentally different way of collaborating that really enables you to collaborate at scale, and that doesn't have the scaling issues that traditional collaboration has. So what is an open collaboration? An open collaboration is a collaboration where everyone can view your source code or your blueprints or the recipe that you're producing, and everyone can follow along with the conversations that are had around that, the decisions that are being made, and everyone can see how they can contribute to the project. And it's clear how the governance of the project works so that you can contribute to it and be a part of the community, and you know what that means, which also means that you for the community produces is good and the right thing, and it means you can be involved with that. Now, I think the important aspect of that is that it changes the fundamental sort of paradigm of how technology is used in organizations. It's moving away from the traditional sort of vendor-consumer model, where you have one party who makes something and one party who uses something, towards a model that is different, where you have a party that makes something, which is often also a party that uses something, or at least the two are more intricately linked. And then you have others who just use the thing. But then as they're using whatever has been made, it is in the best interest of the original producers and the people who are maintaining that project to get the people involved, to get the users to submit bug requests, bug reports, or feature requests, those kind of things, and slowly involve them in the process. But if everything is open, that also means that these people have access to the source code, and if someone has a problem and they're a bit more technical, they might tell the original developers like, hey, this is where your problem is, maybe you can fix it here. Or they might be able to even change it themselves and say like, hey, if you change this code into this code, then you solve this problem. And in that way, people can become contributors to your project. This can be in code in software projects, but it can also be in documentation. It can be in maybe like marketing materials, or it can be a whole range of things. Contributions can also be helping set up a community, organizing events, those kind of things. An open source software, that means that projects can be built by someone, used by a large group of people, and that group of people can form a community to then take ownership and control over that, meaning that you get much more resilient systems that can last for a lot longer time, that are a lot more sustainable, and that also introduces a lot of other advantages. So companies often use open source software because I think first and foremost, they get better software through it. Like, you reuse, make sure that you find edge cases, everything that's a bit weird, or every user has a different context and a different situation. That means they run the software in a different context, or they use your project in a different context. It means they find all the faults in it. And it means that those people can bring you improvements back. But also it can be a way of marketing. It can be a way of collaborating without becoming, without getting into antitrust violations. It can be a great way to avoid vendor lock-in. And it can be a lot easier to support, and you kind of know more what you're getting into. It's easier to license, it's easier to deal with the licenses because all the licenses are standardized and predictable. So what does that mean for cities? And I'm going to talk a bit about, especially about like city and local governments here. But for city and local governments, open source has some other advantages. Mainly, they do a lot of very similar things, and they really have an advantage in open source because it means that a lot of the similar things they do, they can create solutions once and then share different implementations of this. And it allows them to have more sovereignty. What we see now is that there's really a sort of like a smart city burnout with a lot of cities because of vendor lock-in and how the relationship between the market and the public administrations have been over the last few years. And open source adds a model in which the cities can be responsible for the execution of their own code. They can have access to it, they can open up the hood without it meaning that the cities need to do everything themselves. It means that the market parties can still build things and can implement the things, but the cities can still have control over this. So this is a big factor. So in SCORE, we have SCORE is basically trying to transnationally build solutions, and in order to achieve that, we have some tools built in. Open collaborations are quite a new way of collaborating for a lot of the partners in SCORE, and so getting acquainted with the new tools in that is really important. The core of the SCORE project is the community that we have, the SCORE Community Forum, which is where we discuss everything according to the project. We very consciously chose to do less emailing in this project and more open communication. So on the SCORE community, we talk about the SCORE project in its own right. We talk about how to improve our process. And we also talk about the things that we want to make. We try to get conversations where we openly discuss what we want to do and involve all the stakeholders of those conversations in those conversations online so that everyone can follow along and so that everyone can also put input into those conversations. And next to that, we use a platform called GitHub. GitHub is it's basically a social network for coding, for collaboratively developing software. And on that, we can collaborate between cities. Cities have their own GitHub accounts. And also we can work together on standards that we're developing for within our project. For instance, we want every project to have a quality of code that is comparable so that it's easy to re-implement it. For this, we've made these principles for quality code with Amsterdam and Ghent, and everyone can contribute to the project according to this. And this is also a living document, so anyone can suggest changes to it, and then we can discuss those changes and adopt them. So in SCORE, I think SCORE, what we're trying to do is more than it just being a project, we're really trying to create a partnership. We're really trying to create, to get exercise in a way of working that we believe can lead to better development for our kinds of organizations, and that can lead to more of a grip on IT systems in our contexts, allow us to build better data infrastructures, better open data infrastructures, and also just increase the delivery of public service, the quality of that. In that, we're an open community, even though we have an Interreg project, which is gives co-financing to the partners for projects that they do together. We want to be an open community, and we're quite eager to also work together with partners who are not in the project in order to try and figure out how to make the software better. So if you are interested in the SCORE project, you can join the SCORE community. Also, Claus and I can sort of like show you around and introduce you to the important people, etc. And we would really love to do more things together with people. And that's it for me. Thank you very much. I think we can now go over to Ben.
Thank you very much, Boris. That was very interesting. Yeah, next up, as you said, is Ben now. And I hope everybody can see now also the slides. Sorry for the technical issues in the beginning. I hope everybody's now in. So over to you, Ben.
Hi, good afternoon. Let me try and get this presentation going. Can you all see the screen? There we go. That's one slide away. Yeah, so I'm Ben Cerveny. I'm a co-founder and co-director of the Foundation for Public Code. My co-founder is also Boris van Hoytema, who just spoke with you. So it's a smooth segue. You might even notice a similarity to the presentation template. Anyway, I just wanted to speak a little bit about how the foundation operates and what its sort of value is to a project like SCORE. I'm going to skip through a lot of slides because, not surprisingly, Boris managed to talk to you about a lot of these issues. But one of the things I wanted to point out was that, you know, outside of SCORE and just sort of in general in the way that cities have been working around software development, a lot of them have sort of realized that developing software internally is actually a really sound solution relative to some of the sort of deals that they've been offered by third-party vendors over the years. And so we've reached this point in kind of municipal understanding of what software development is, where there's a realization that the city needs to sort of start to take ownership over some of these processes themselves. And in doing that, they already have often developed quite a few tools that they use in problem solving in a variety of tasks. And those solutions have been developed in open source, which means that they do have all these characteristics that Boris just described. But one of the main problems is that cities, you know, aside from projects like SCORE and other initiatives that are sort of intermunicipal collaboration initiatives, there aren't really dedicated roles in municipalities that sort of speak to this opportunity of sharing open source code bases with each other. You sort of it turns out that the code base is only part of the problem from a technical perspective. You also have the political perspective, which is where policy comes in, and also the sort of social perspective, which is where you know, these kind of the need for these sorts of actors on the ground comes in. So so what we're sort of proposing, also, by the way, kind of thinking about this idea of open source, although a lot of the characteristics that Boris just described are super valuable from a technical perspective in terms of co-development of software together as cities, there are some things that open source doesn't address, and those things are around the issues of developing as people together, in terms of whether people, the actual actors involved in the process, can actually understand how the development works and the collaboration works. But also from a use perspective of the software, open source doesn't really address some of the issues that software needs to sort of exhibit, or some of the characteristics that software needs to exhibit if it's going to succeed in a public context, which is that it needs to be open and accountable and transparent. So one of the things that we've always talked about at the Foundation for Public Code is the fact that code is code, in the sense that policy, which is one type of code, is also much like software, which is another type of code. And in fact, a lot of policy is being replaced by software, sometimes by third-party vendors that don't have open systems, and therefore we're sort of eroding some of the deliberative processes that we've used to arrive at the policy by replacing them with the black boxes that some software vendors provide, and don't allow us a transparency into what's happening in the systems that are ostensibly under the control of the cities, but instead the keys have been given away to other providers. So what public code allows us to do is provide this kind of sovereignty by sort of providing frameworks and tool sets for both public policy and public software development for digital municipal infrastructure. So there's a lot of different qualities that you want to be able to support in this infrastructure. And you know, all of these things are capabilities that can be provided through the development of software together. So Boris actually already addressed some of these issues around what it means to have a public software. A lot of these do come from the, sort of the grounding in open source, but on top of that, you then have this legibility and accountability that are necessary for what we consider, what is something that's public and it is a shared resource, much like the commons in kind of the regime of sort of intellectual property and content. You have public in terms of open processes that are supported by a coalition of actors that are working together to make it usable and useful. So specifically what the foundation provides and how it ties into what SCORE does is that as these sort of processes develop, these collaborative frameworks develop to make these things happen, to build these projects and to make them useful across multiple municipalities, what you really need to do is to have a way of talking about these types of resources in a specific way, and thus we're sort of talking about evolving a certification process that would you could submit a code base under development in a project like SCORE, for instance, to the foundation, and we would provide an auditing service which brings technical developers from our side into a coding process that a city is, producing tools for themselves, whether they're, budget projection tools or parking services tools or K-12 school management tools, or any type of software development process can be made useful to other cities with some very simple steps, mainly documentation that's full and complete and legible, commented code bases that are sort of formatted to be modular and component based and potentially deployable in the cloud quite easily and approachable by IT people on the ground in municipalities that are going to try and implement the tool. So the idea is that as one is in the development process, Boris was talking about this concept of GitHub and continuous integration and kind of dynamic development of multiple developers simultaneously on one project. If you submit to your code base to this process of public code auditing, then the foundation can provide guidance to your process that results in something that is certified as public code, in the sense that you will comply with the sort of characteristics that we've laid out as sort of public code criteria. And then possibly you can also look at some of the white papers that we provided from a policy perspective that will help your municipality begin to reform its procurement process and require some of these characteristics in the code that they procure for software contracts, so that going forward, the tools that will be implemented in municipalities will be this type of open, transparent, and collaboratively oriented tool, such that there's sort of sustainability and the ability to pass on sort of understanding of how the code works between municipalities and into the future. And so that's why the second service that we provide is code-based stewardship. So the idea that once you have achieved a sort of a software engineering project that sort of qualifies as public code, the idea is that our foundation will serve as something akin to the Apache or Mozilla Foundation for digital public infrastructure projects, so that pieces of software that have been under development in these types of collaborations and have achieved a deployment in one or more municipalities that is sort of active and continuously developed. That's the other thing that's really great about open source software projects, is that you can take in contributions from all sorts of different deployments. So as different cities fork this software and use it in their own context and improve it based on some of the use cases that they run into, they can contribute those improvements back to the mainline code base so that everyone can benefit from their work. And so, but this process requires the continuous, sort of ongoing auditing process that allows for all of these contributions to be vetted as, similarly legible and documented and available, as microservices and available for cloud deployment. So, all of those capabilities are things that you want to have in an institutional process such that a city can confidently procure a piece of software that has an entity that will guarantee the longevity of the community of development around that software, because this is often where we see, this is probably the biggest choke point in the deployment of open source software in municipalities, is that procurement processes rely on service level agreements with large commercial software contractors, such that they can guarantee services for 5 or 10 years into the future, for the life cycle of the deployment of the software. Whereas open source software, because often the communities are ad hoc and don't have a legal sort of organizational infrastructure behind them, cities find it very hard to create relationships with those groups that make that software. So by providing a foundation that is doing code-based stewardship and guaranteeing the sort of perpetuation of the community and the code base into sort of viable and sustainable, forward-looking kind of strategic choice making, that allows a city to rationalize the procurement of open source going forward. So those two activities are sort of the main kind of underpinnings of what the foundation's activity are. We also, through an agency called Verb, we do work with cities to do these types of deployments and to help them prepare code to go into the code base. And we also develop some innovation projects around specific use cases of software in the cities. But the foundation as a whole hopes to, through projects like SCORE and others that we participate in on a European scale, we are building a community of practice that, understands the value of these types of collaborative tool sets, like Discourse and GitHub, and this kind of distributed continuous integration software development process, which then the foundation can serve hopefully as a sort of back end and hub for the technical resources, namely the code bases themselves and the auditing processes that allow those code bases to become mature products that cities can confidently procure in the future. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Ben, for this presentation. Are there any questions now about the SCORE project, about the Foundation for Public Code? You have now, we can make room for one question, and then we move on. Something that's very urgent. You can also post the questions in the system. So there's a little button where we can ask questions, and where the panelists can actually also answer your questions during the presentation. So please feel free also to make use of this tool. So if there are no questions at the moment, we have also prepared now a short poll, and we would like to find out basically which kind of representation, which kind of organizations do you represent. So you can now just briefly click here and send it to us. Be nice. So everybody's voting. All right, so almost 60% of people have voted now. Thanks already for that. And it's going still up. All right, so we have the results. Almost everybody has voted. And as you can see as well, I hope, we have 70% of people who are joining here are from local governments or public administrations. Then we have 30% of commercial representatives and 7% other. That's kind of interesting. Very good to see that the cities are represented here so well. And then the next question, as you can see, is you can now say, are you part of the SCORE community? Are you part of the Synchronicity project? Maybe you're part of both. If you're not sure, I hope nobody answers if he or she is not sure, but as we've heard, the SCORE community is open. So all right. So we have 80% voted, and we have now the results. And yeah, as we can see, we have almost half of the people joining here from the SCORE community, almost 40% from the Synchronicity project. And yeah, it's nice to see that there's also an overlap. 6% of the representatives here are from both projects. That's quite nice. And it's also nice to see that we have representatives here from organizations that are in neither one. So that is quite interesting. Thanks very much for joining this short poll. Yeah, and then we have another poll. So are you working with open source? Will be interesting to see. Here you go. So we have 70% of people who voted. Maybe we give them another 15 seconds or so, and then we can close the poll. All right, I would say the community is quite open to open source. Also nice to see. All right, then I would say thanks very much for participating in the poll. That's really interesting to see, and we're now proceeding to the second part of this webinar. We're now going to share a bit more from the Open and Agile Smart Cities and the Synchronicity perspective, and therefore I would like to hand over to Martin Brynskov, who is chair of the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative, but also coordinator of Synchronicity. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leah. Thank you, Claus, everyone, the presenters, but first and foremost, thanks to the audience for being here. It's great to see these communities coming together, and I feel very strongly that you know, this is the kind of dynamic that is needed in order to take us forward. So it's a pleasure for me to just be sharing a few thoughts from the perspective of OASC, obviously, but very much how it's made concrete in Synchronicity. So let me share with you how this looks. So Synchronicity is an instrument to realize the OASC vision. And so what is that? That is to deliver a market for IoT-enabled urban services for Europe and beyond. And that is the project's formulation of this. And you could add piloted in the framework of Synchronicity. You probably know Maria Gabriel, the European Commissioner for Digital Economy and Society. So they're linked directly to this European ambition of actually moving things forward, where we seem to be having this kind of chicken and egg situation between the demand and supply side. Open Agile Smart Cities is not just a lot of cities. It's a global network of national networks or territorial networks, to use the United Nations term. You know, some turfs are a little bit contested. We're preparing now for the Brexit and all that. And in fact, if you appreciate, England and Scotland have different groups here. So it's not just, you know, one per nation. We say we play by FIFA rules. So if you have a football team for the FIFA World Cup, you can have your own. Let's see. Still to be questioned. The point is that it's a very local way of organizing these things, but linked up to a global vision, and that is to create a global market based on the needs of cities and communities. It's the demand side. It's those who want to buy, those who want to provision these new technologies and harness them to make lives better for people on the ground. It's where the rubber hits the road. It's where you cannot deny, you cannot slice the consequences of the new technologies. They all come together. You cannot say, oh, this is only transportation, this is only health. No, it's all of it at the same time. So while still recognizing that cities are, of course, complex, perhaps the most complex thing that have come into existence by human hand, it's also one of the most resilient ones, if not the most resilient. So it's interesting really to see the power dynamics also of cities coming together with a common voice against, if you can envision, this big tsunami of technology heading towards us. Indeed, we are in the middle of it. More than 100 cities in 24 countries and growing. Leah will come back to our excellent Council of Cities coordinator from Ghent, Bart Rousseau, and Laurent from Carouge, Geneva. So what the ultimate goal is here to actually help to create a robust model for standards-based innovation procurement of these services across domains. So that's a pretty packed statement, but just to unpack it a little bit. Robust means validated in reality, in practice. So Synchronicity is based on pilots and OASC is based on implementation, not just putting good ideas on a table and then voting for the worst, best. So that reflects very closely to the open source vision of let's be practice-based. Innovation procurement has two things. Of course, there's the big instrument of procurement there. So cities have large budgets. Local governments, they buy things all the time. So it's a big driver of the market, which is often overlooked when we have been looking to the big globals in IT and so on. But increasingly, as these domains come together, and that's the last part, well, in fact, where you can see the precursors of putting these things together, that's not in the big globals. Of course, they can put things together when they can, slice off whatever they want of the world. But when you put it all together, that actually happens on the ground of cities. So this increasing demand to have a cross-domain or horizontal perspective on procurement, of course linked to innovation, so you don't get the gap between innovation and procurement, is now really becoming a market driver, as we've seen also voiced before. So why standards? It's interesting that the demand side and supply side actually have different reasons for supporting a standardized approach. If we first look on the supply side, so the commercial side, reusability, replicability, and scalability are the main drivers. And that also goes, if I may reflect, to the SCORE community, the developers inside cities. So the guys who sit in Amsterdam, Ghent, Aarhus, and so on, building systems from the inside, not buying them from the market. They would go actually with the supply side logic, yeah? And their reusability, replicability, and scalability gives you scale and agility, both in development and deployment. But interesting, if you look at it from a policy perspective or a delivery perspective, if you're the city director or I don't know, really on the high level KPI side of a city, then it's a different set of values you're getting. You get replaceability, right? You can sack a provider if you don't like that service, and you can carry on with another one, or you can change things internally if you don't like the way it's done. It gives you basically flexibility, portability. You can take your data elsewhere, or you can switch to another system and port it. And it gives you comparability. You can actually benchmark internally and externally before you buy or after you buy, or while you just do your ongoing monitoring of quality. So essentially, that gives you choice, efficiency, value of money, and independence. And that's what you want from a management perspective, and certainly from a citizen perspective. And ultimately, that translates into a voter perspective. So it's interesting to see how these logics actually both derive from interoperability, but they're certainly not expressed in the same values. Now, what it gives to both sides is that it reduces the risk. And why is that important? Well, that's actually the biggest barrier currently for investments. If you look at the risk profiles for so-called smart cities investment pitches or projects, they're like through the roof. They're insane. This is why we don't have the institutional investors putting their money in this. Not because the world is lacking money. It's because the risk profiles are not there. So we need to reduce this risk in order to not blow up what works really well, to get the investment, the innovation. In order to bridge this gap, there is this proposal of a common technical ground, and that's of course the base OASC vision. And it comes in synchronicity in 4 steps. So from OASC, there's the neutral branding, and that's a very important point. So OASC is essentially the voice of the cities, and basically doesn't care who came up with the best practice as long as it is furthering the needs of the cities. So based on standards, that includes standards fora, but not, we don't have the time to wait for that to come together, but it's consensus specification. So it's solid. It's based on policy that we can predict. That's very important for the market. Then there are the actual interoperability mechanisms, so introduced by OASC as MIMS, but we will come back to that. But actually, the point is to keep it simple, but crucial. So context information management, data models, and transaction management, which translates into marketplaces, you could say, or this is where all the licenses and so on are handled. These 3 elements are essential. You cannot have these platforms for the future without these, is the claim. But let's try and see how low can we go? How simple can we make it? Then what Synchronicity does is a reference implementation of that, of course, based on standards. And actually, we foresee several implementations already based on different approaches. And then, of course, the piloting, including the whole cloud hosting options. Just to sort of express the practical division of labor. But you could say that the 1 and 2 you could do, and then SCORE could do like another way to do it, right? Another reference implementation, or just do things on pilots and so on, and host it and run it whichever way you want. So it's actually possible to do like that. Just to say that we work on partnerships with pretty much everyone. I'm sorry for missing the SCORE logo here, it should be obvious. Project objectives, I will leave them there, but if you just look at point 9 here, so coming back to your presentation, Ben, I think transform city policy making and planning, that's a tall order, but that's basically what we're looking at, right? But then what are the steps to get there? We have an ambitious work plan, only 3 years. Thomas will explain in a little bit more, but we are now in the middle of it, actually the very middle of Synchronicity. We have some initial applications being served out now, and we've just closed the open call and are rolling out new pilots based on what has come in now. We have 130 pilot proposals come in here by the 1st of October. So it'd be very, very exciting to see that rolled out in all the cities and see where this all goes. So Helsinki, Manchester, Eindhoven, Antwerp, Carouge, Milan, Santander, and Porto. Really, really, I think interesting to see vis-a-vis the 9 cities in SCORE, that you see these front runners trying to find out, okay, how do we move things forward? There are some simple steps to become ready for this, and I think this, especially for the SCORE community, would be interesting to look at. So what does it actually mean to look at this common ground? I mean, okay, we can be completely bottom up, or we can see if actually it makes sense with this MIM approach, so that we need some context information management, shared data models, and some transaction mechanisms. Well, it's just become very practical. This is a link over to Thomas. He has a follow-up on the technical side, but just to say that if you know architectures, we have sliced out the most important ones and documented them quite specifically in very, I would say, verbose form, also online available, but this is for further reference later. So this is the value proposition. If you take OASC and Synchronicity together, to give choice on one side and to give scale and agility on the other side, and overall reduce risk, increase investments, and drive innovation. but also to give a path from the whole, R&D, R&I, research, innovation, development, to actual implementation with all the new technologies that are there. And I think if you take only the bold words here, it says city needs, so based on city needs. I think actually all of these points you can achieve without having city needs in the middle. Yeah, you can really make platforms that do all of this, but just ignore the complexity and priorities of various local situations. And I think that's the real difference that we're bringing here. We're bridging those technical and other aspects with the view from the ground. So I would just want to hear a final link over. So what about this open and free? OASC, Synchronicity, is data open and free? Is it open source? Do you have open and license-free APIs and access? Who owns the data infrastructure? How do you balance security and surveillance, and who facilitates this trust and risk sharing? That's a very good question. And I think SCORE is one of the answers to that question, that there's a particular community with a particular vision and some cities who want to do it in a specific way. So, I mean, it's up to you. Cities are different across the globe, and OASC is global, mind you. So this is, just a picture of how it was envisioned if you really work with communities on the local ground. This is organicity. SCORE, as mentioned, is of course another way, but you can envision many, many other ways to realize this common ground. It's just to say that it's not a full package that you have to take wholesale. No, it's the bits and pieces that can actually keep us together. So just to end on a reflection of this minimal versus more complete approach, I think it's clear by now that having tried to do the whole enchilada for smart cities for 10 years, it doesn't work. We need something that's much more practical and simple. We don't need more reference architectures. We have, I don't know how many thousands, also platforms, IoT platforms. No, we need some framework models that work for alignment. This challenge-driven approach also doesn't work. Bring your problems and we will solve them and then scale. No way, it simply doesn't work. We need some enablers, and then the context will decide how it plays out in many places. And of course, it has to be validated by reality, and with both a global and a regional logic, and clearly that this transparent inspection that you are also pushing, both Boris and Ben, versus the complete black box. We will solve all your problems and take all the risk, and here's the contract. I think clearly the need for introspection, inspection, transparency from the demand side is evident by now. So thanks. I will give the floor to Thomas, and I will be your DJ switching the slides here, Thomas. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Hi, so my name is Thomas Gilbert, and I work for the Alexandra Institute, and I'm on the Synchronicity project. What I want to do today is talk about what we've been working on, basically. We've done work on IoT frameworks, atomic services, and applications. Of course, I can't possibly cover this in the 10-minute slot I've been given, so I'll be extremely brief, and I hope you'll follow up with questions afterwards. So one of the things I wanted to start with is talk interoperability. What we've worked with here in Synchronicity is more of it, how to understand it, how it works in a smart city, platform interoperability, and also how to make it uncomplicated. In Synchronicity, we have this concept of interoperability points. It is sort of a way of abstracting away all the complex things that go into an IoT infrastructure, an IoT platform. We focused here on context APIs, data models, security APIs, and just the basic things that you need to get to understand to work with the platform, but not necessarily how it works internally, or the mechanics inside it. We, of course, with Synchronicity have a reference implementation, one that you can download, you can run it as a cloud service. it is a fully functional reference implementation, and we have some online already for the open call as well that are ready and working. These are not the only way of implementing synchronicity. There are others as well, but this is the one we've chosen as a reference. What we've done, and one of the things we've really pushed for, is sort of documenting how to get started with these interoperability points. Source code is of course available online on GitLab, and one of the things we have is sort of this the API documentation, where you can look at it, see all the calls that you can make to the platform, and test it out online, which is really helpful. What this does is that developers, they can use whatever language, whatever preferences they have, and have sort of a uniform access to the data, to the APIs that we provide. Just a silly example, and I know, so from a developer's perspective, one of the things we spend most time on is sort of interoperability and getting things to work, and not actually solving the problem at hand. And so a silly example is, if this curl command works on my computer, it will work on everybody else's computer. And the result is, of course, standard. This is an open standard model JSON that can be used by anybody. And I think that's one of the things we've come really far with in this project. In the project, we also have a marketplace, and we've seen marketplaces before, providing access to data, monetization of data. And one of the things we will be releasing soon in our advanced marketplace, as we call it, is SLA management as well, using blockchain technology. And one of the things that has been missing, we think, from other marketplaces is trust. And so this way of managing SLAs, agreements, will sort of bring trust closer and also enable people to use data more. So what about the application? So Synchronicity has these three different topics or themes. We have human-centric traffic management, multimodal transportation, and community policy suite. Within the project, we are testing these concepts out on real live cities: Antwerp, Eindhoven, Helsinki, Manchester, and more. We have one technical partner in each of these cities working on these domains and implementing real-life applications. One of the things we found that we didn't have already was this concept of atomic services. What you can do with the APIs is quite straightforward, but it would be nice to sort of have these reusable services, atomic services, that can be used across cities or across instances of this platform. And we have this, of course, easily deployable, replicatable, and sort of city agnostic as well. So if one city has a problem that can be solved with an atomic service, then we might as well use the same atomic service in other cities where it's relevant. We had this approach to how to devise the best atomic services possible and make them sort of generic enough but still useful. I won't go into the details of that. You can read the slides later. But this is what it looks like, basically. We have at the bottom all the APIs that I talked about earlier. At the top, we have the applications and the users. And in between, if it makes sense, we can have these atomic services that in some way sort of function as microservices that you can use to build your applications, and more rapidly as well. We have an example, and at the end I actually have a small video. I'm not sure if the sound works, but we'll try it out anyway, that demonstrates these atomic services, and if not, you can have the slides later. But anyway, we have this sort of we have open data and we have applications, but then suddenly we needed this sort of component that could offer machine learning capabilities to solve a specific problem, and we've published that as an atomic service. That's just one example. You can have the slides later, of course, but we have visualization components that we call atomic services. Lots of different ways of sort of not having something specific, but also not too generic, but something that solves a concrete problem. And that's something we really contribute with a lot in Synchronicity. More of them. And here's the video. Let's see if it works. This is from Helsinki.
Hello, greetings from Helsinki. Next, a short demo showcasing the air quality journey planner developed in Helsinki. The idea is simple. We use air quality data collected throughout the city. The service optimizes a clean route using that data. Let's say you want to go from here to here. In addition to the original route, the service gives you an optional cleaner route. And this is the core service. It already works. The service itself is in the early stages, and we will implement noise data and visual additions and other things. But the core of the service already works, and as shown, gives optional routes. Thank you.
That's just it sounds quite silly, but what was happening was quite incredible actually. We took a simple services for route planning and also augmented it with real live data. And that's just the beginning actually, in fact. And this is going on all across all the different domains, this sort of way of bringing simple things together with data and bringing new services to life. Thanks very much. That was what I had on from a sort of semi-developer's perspective.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and also thank you very much, Martin, for this overview of synchronicity. I would just at the moment encourage everyone to share questions already now in the system. There's a tool where you can post your questions if you have some, so please share them and we will address them after my short presentation about how the Council of Cities works in OASC. Yes, so if you have any questions, you can either post them, you can also wait, and there's a tool where you can basically raise your hands afterwards, so we will have enough time to address all your questions afterwards. All right, so I'm trying to share my screen now again, and I hope that you won't see again my messy desktop, but for real this time my presentation. Just give me a second. I think now it should actually be working. So this is what you should have seen before. Anyways, we're moving now on. I will shortly explain how the cities will in the future within OASC approve all the standards and also suggest new standards. As Martin mentioned before, what's the vision of OASC? The vision of OASC is to create an open smart city market that is actually based on the needs of cities and communities. And just to give a short recap, I know some of this has already been said, OASC has been founded in 2015 with already 31 cities from 7 countries. And it was for quite some time a grassroots initiative, if you want to call it like this. And only a few months back, it has been incorporated as an NGO. With the goal to better support all the cities that are part of the network. So what is the structure at the moment? The structure looks like this. Since we're incorporated, we have a board of directors, and I will give you a better explanation in a minute. We have the management, which is the OASC Secretariat. And most importantly, we have the Council of Cities, which is currently coordinated by Bart Rousseau. And as Martin mentioned, we have 24 national / regional networks with currently 117 member cities that are part of this Council of Cities. We also have working groups. We work in projects, as we have noticed in Synchronicity, for example. We work together with many partners as well. And we try to bring everybody together in several events all over the year. And you will get an outlook also in these slides, what's coming up for you to save the date. So the board of directors. Currently on the board of directors, we have representatives of the 4 founding partners. These are the Aarhus University, Business Tampere, the Regional Development Agency of Tampere in Finland, and the Future Cities Catapult, a UK development agency, and EMAC, which is a Belgian research center. And we also have a representative of the cities at the board of directors. And currently this is Laurent Horvatz from OASC Switzerland. He's representing the Swiss, he's managing the Swiss network, and he represents the cities in the board of directors. He has been elected in the beginning of the year in March in the first ever OASC elections after the incorporation. And at the same time, we have also elected, not we, but the cities have elected the coordinator of the Council of Cities. And this is currently Bart Rousseau. He's the Chief Data Officer of the city of Ghent. He's coordinating also OASC Belgium. And as you know, the city of Ghent is also part of SCORE, so there's also a nice collaboration here. So what is the Council of Cities? First of all, it's a forum for all OASC member cities to get together on a regular basis, to exchange views, to update each other on what's going on. But more importantly, it is the Council of Cities is the body within OASC that is able to suggest and finally approve minimal interoperability mechanisms. And that will happen also for the first time now in the new year. In 2019, we will have the first ever election on MIMS. And this election will be organized in a way that is open and transparent. And we will organize in the end of November, on 23rd of November, more concretely, a webinar, or we can also call it a public hearing, on the MIMS that are coming from the Synchronicity project, where they are, as you've heard, developed and tested in pilots and reference implementations. And we will explain in this webinar what they are concretely, so that member cities can pose questions, provide feedback, and so on and so forth. And this public hearing is not only open to OASC members, but this public hearing is actually open to the public, to everyone who is interested in what minimal interoperability mechanisms can do. And then we will have a period of a few weeks where the cities can provide more feedback, can ask more questions to really get to grips of what's going on here. And then we will have the election on the 16th of January. So that will be quite an exciting time, I would say. So then the dates, as I've mentioned, there are a few events that are upcoming. So we have a big presence also at the Smart City Expo World Congress in Barcelona. Then very important as well, the webinar on the MIMS, as just mentioned, which is open to everybody. And I really hope that also the SCORE community will contribute here. Then we have an event in Vienna, the ICT 2018, where we'll be present with Synchronicity as well, presenting some of the new pilots that are now being selected after the open call has closed last weekend. And then our annual event, the Connected Smart Cities Conference in Brussels, where the whole community comes together, the whole OASC community comes together, and all the partners, we hope. And the discussions will be taken further then also in IoT Week in Aarhus. And if you want to stay up to date to all the events, where we are and what our partners are organizing, you can check out the OASC calendar on our website. And you can just subscribe to it, add it to your calendar, and you will be always up to date. All right, so that is now a short overview of the organization within OASC and the approval of future MIMS. And now I would very much like to open the floor to questions. Well, and we also still have a little poll. Sorry about that. So the question is, are you working actually with OASC? Who is here who works with OASC? Please tell us who you are. Are you a member? Are you working with the members and projects? Are you hoping to become a member maybe soon? Are you checking it out? I hope that nobody tried it and gave up on it. Anyways, if you did, tell us. And we're trying to improve. All right, so we have 60 people voted, maybe some more. Share your opinions with us. We're really keen to know. All right. Maybe some more. Almost 70% have voted. So it's your time now to vote. But I think we will stay at 70%. So I would say, yeah, let's close the poll. So yeah, that's nice to see. Almost half of the people here participating are actually a member. And we also have people who are working with the members and projects. That's cool. So thanks for joining us. And then we also have people who will check it out and maybe join us soon. That's nice to see. Great to see that people are interested still in open and agile smart cities. All right. I'm also glad to see that nobody actually wants us, nobody gave up. So quite happy to read this. All right, so do we have questions now from the audience? Is there anybody who would like to raise his or her hand? Nope, not for now. Maybe I would then give the floor to Claus and Martin. Maybe you both have some words to share after this webinar. And maybe some of the participants will come up with more questions while you're speaking.
Sure, thank you, Leah. So I think it was kind of really interesting to see kind of what is happening in SCORE, what is happening in Synchronicity, and of course, most importantly, kind of what the common ground is and how we can start to look at kind of how we can transfer knowledge from one project to the other and really kind of harness on those two movements, or actually make it kind of one movement. Yeah, I'm quite interested to see kind of the reflections from the other panelists. Maybe we could hear from Martin, Boris, and Ben, and Thomas. Kind of see, maybe the question would be kind of how do we see the overlap between SCORE and Synchronicity?
Thanks. Yes, this is Martin also from my side. Very nice to see, I would say, a good complementarity, and I really think that it's great also just to see the seriousness and the urgency that's put into this. So we know Amsterdam is now launching together with some other cities this Digital Rights Alliance. I think there's a lot of concern about how do we actually manage this technology development. So it's really, I think, also worth building the community and ecosystem, if you will, infrastructure or links to, you know, energize people, inspire, and let's do some things together. But certainly things that work on robust, you know, big, also commercial terms globally. So we can really lift the weight of the world, which is, I think, is essentially what the cities are doing. So very happy to see this convergence, and also with the events very concretely bringing people physically together. You know, everything is nicer when you're face to face. I don't know if you, Ben or Thomas, if you have some reflections as well. I invite you to share.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting just that we're sort of all, you know, there's a lot of talk about this idea of stacks, you know, these days, and it feels as though we, you know, these projects in some ways serve as a stack, a process stack that work well together in terms of sort of places for the active development of the software, of the communities, you know, by which the software can be made, and the sort of, you know, back end by which those things can be shared and maintained long term. So it's interesting that it's sort of an emergent kind of framework of collaborations, but it also, you know, there's a lot of serendipity, I guess. Synchronicity is the word between the ways that we all sort of provide you know, potential ways to work together. So it's actually quite nice to see that.
Yeah, and Boris, of course, also if you have some reflections.
I think you've covered my reflections. To me, yeah, this the most important part of all of this is community, and I think that all of our projects, in a way, are about community. It's about figuring out together how we can solve all these huge issues that are coming at us by the wave of digitization and the onset of the information society. And I think that the speed of change is really so high that we need to find new ways of working together and making that work. And I really believe our projects are at the forefront of that. But of course, like it's really important that we figure out how to implement this across our organizations, in both the commercial field and in the public field. And so I also would like to invite anyone in these projects to take part in our conversations about that, both in the OASC and in the SCORE context. So yeah, that, and I look forward to working with everyone here, more than we already.
Thank you very much, Boris, also for your reflections here, and thanks to everyone on the panel also for sharing your insights, for sharing your thoughts on this topic. Is there anybody from the attendees who would like to comment as well on this, or would ask a question? We're really happy to hear your thoughts as well. So please feel free to raise your hand here in the meeting. Is there anybody who would like to? No? No questions? I think maybe then we all did a good job. No? Okay. I cannot see anybody having a question or raising a hand. In any case, if you have follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us via email. You can, for example, always send an email to info@oascities.org, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Many of you might also have my personal email, so you know how to reach me. I guess it's the same for SCORE. You can find the emails in the presentations as well. They will be sent around, and I hope it's okay to say also for the colleagues that you can always feel free to reach them out, and they said open community, so you're always welcome to join and contribute here to both communities. In any case, I would like to thank all presenters. I would also like to say thank you to our partners from SCORE in general. I think it was a very nice webinar that we had today. And thanks especially to everybody who joined us here, who took the time over lunch to listen to us, listen about what we're having to say and share with you. And just wanted to say that we are recording this webinar. We have recorded this webinar, and we will be sharing this recording with you and also with the colleagues from the other cities and project participants. And also the slides will be shared. So we will follow up with more information and follow-up information with you soon. Is there anybody who would like to have one last word before I close the meeting from the panelists? That's your chance now.
Yeah, so one of the most important things from my perspective is that we stop trying to improve everything by 1% each time and just stick to something, make it a standard, and then build something of value on top of it, real applications that change sort of people's lives even. I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you, Thomas. I think that is a very nice last sentence to close this meeting. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and hope to see you soon, either at one of the events that are coming up or in a follow-up webinar. I'm sure we have more in coming down the line, and it would be great to see you soon. Talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, guys.